I was standing on my icy driveway in Traverse City, Michigan, staring up at my roof where the heat tape should have been, when I realized that Patricia Whitmore had finally gone too far this time. My name is Quincy Olsen, and I have lived in the Maple Ridge subdivision for 3 years now. The house is a modest 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters. Nothing fancy, but it is mine. Or rather, it is mine and the bank's for another 27 years. I work as an electrical engineer at a manufacturing plant about 30 minutes away, and I keep to myself mostly. I do not bother anyone. I mow my lawn. I shovel my driveway. And I certainly do not go around vandalizing other people's property. Patricia, on the other hand, seemed to have made it her life's mission to find fault with everything I did. She was the president of our homeowner-association, a position she had held for the past 7 years according to my neighbor Glenn. Patricia was 52 years old with that distinctive haircut that tapered at the back and swooped across her forehead. She drove a white Lexus SUV and wore expensive wool coats, even though we lived in a middle-class neighborhood where most people drove Hondas and Fords. The heat tape incident happened on a bitter February morning when the temperature had dropped to -15 degrees overnight. I had installed the heat tape along my gutters and roof edges in November, a standard winterization procedure that prevented ice dams from forming. Ice dams are a serious problem in northern Michigan. When snow on your roof melts and refreezes at the edges, it creates a dam that prevents proper drainage. Water backs up under your shingles, causing leaks, rot, and thousands of dollars in damage. I had noticed the heat tape was gone when I was leaving for work at 6 in the morning. The sun was not even up yet, but I could see in the light from my garage that something was wrong. The cable that should have been zigzagging along my roof edge was completely missing. I stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air, trying to process what I was seeing. At first, I thought maybe the wind had torn it loose, but that made no sense. I had secured it with proper clips designed specifically for this purpose. I had followed the installation instructions to the letter. Then, I noticed the cut ends dangling from where I had attached the tape to my outlet box near the soffit. Someone had deliberately cut my heat tape and removed it. I was already running late for work, so I decided to deal with it when I got home. All day at the plant, I kept thinking about those clean-cut marks. This was not wear and tear or weather damage. This was intentional destruction of my property. When I pulled into my driveway that evening around 5:30, Patricia's white Lexus was parked in front of my house. She was standing on the sidewalk with her phone out, taking pictures of my property. She wore a camel-colored wool coat and brown leather boots that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Can I help you?" I called out as I climbed out of my truck. Patricia lowered her phone and gave me that tight-lipped smile that never reached her eyes. "Quincy, we need to discuss your violation of the HOA bylaws." "My what?" "Your heat tape. Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Community Guidelines clearly states that no exterior modifications or additions can be made without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee." I felt my jaw clench. The heat tape was barely visible from the street, and it certainly was not a permanent modification. "Patricia, heat tape is a temporary winterization measure. It prevents ice dams. Temporary or not, it requires approval. I noticed it back in November and sent you a courtesy notice. When you failed to remove it, I took appropriate action. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. You cut my heat tape." "I enforced HOA policy," she corrected, her tone maddeningly calm. "The tape has been removed and disposed of. You are welcome to reapply for approval through proper channels. though I should warn you that exterior heating elements typically do not align with our community aesthetic standards. Aesthetic standards. Patricia, it is negative temperatures outside. Ice dams cause serious damage. I am trying to protect my investment. She shrugged, a small gesture that conveyed complete indifference to my concerns. That is what homeowners insurance is for. The rules exist for everyone's benefit. If I let you bend them, then everyone will want exceptions. This is not bending the rules. This is basic home maintenance. The Architectural Review Committee meets the third Tuesday of each month. You can submit your application then. She turned and walked toward her Lexus, her boots crunching on the salt-covered sidewalk. I stood there watching her drive away, my hands balled into fists inside my coat pockets. The heat tape had cost me almost $300, and now it was gone. More importantly, my roof was vulnerable. We were only halfway through February, with at least another month of freezing temperatures ahead. That night, I dug through the stack of mail I had been tossing into a drawer in my kitchen. Sure enough, buried among the credit card offers and grocery store circulars was an envelope from the Maple Ridge Homeowner Association. The letter inside was dated November 18th, 3 days after I had installed the heat tape. It informed me that I was in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4, and that I had 30 days to remedy the situation or face enforcement action. I had never seen this letter. Looking at the envelope more carefully, I realized it had gotten stuck to a furniture sale advertisement. I genuinely had not known about the notice. Not that it would have mattered. Heat tape in Michigan winter was not negotiable as far as I was concerned. Over the next 2 days, the temperature fluctuated between 25 degrees during the day and near 0 at night. The snow on my roof went through multiple melt-freeze cycles. On the third day, I noticed water stains on my bedroom ceiling. The ice dam had formed exactly where I knew it would, right along the edge of my roof above the master bedroom. Water was backing up under the shingles and seeping into my attic. I went up into the crawl space and confirmed my fears. The insulation was wet, and water was dripping down onto the drywall. I immediately called a roofing company, but they were booked solid for the next 2 weeks. Ice dam emergencies were keeping every roofer in the county busy. The best they could offer was to put me on a cancellation list. The next morning, I went to Patricia's house to try reasoning with her one more time. She lived 4 streets over in a larger colonial with professional landscaping and a 3-car garage. Her house was easily twice the size of mine, one of the more expensive properties in the subdivision. I rang the doorbell and waited. Patricia answered wearing a burgundy sweater and black slacks, looking like she was ready for a business meeting even though it was Saturday morning. "Quincy, what can I do for you? My roof is leaking because of the ice dam. The heat tape would have prevented this." "I am sorry to hear about your leak. Have you contacted your insurance company?" "Patricia, this did not have to happen. I installed that heat tape specifically to avoid this problem." And I explained that it violated community guidelines. The rules apply to everyone equally. "Do they?" "Because I took a drive around the neighborhood yesterday. Glenn Morrison has heat tape on his gutters. So does the Hendricks family on Birch Street. The Kowalskis have it. The Patels have it. I counted 8 other houses with visible heat tape, and that is just what I could see from the street." For the first time, Patricia's composed expression faltered slightly. "If you have documented violations, you are welcome to report them to the HOA. I do not want to report anyone. I want you to stop enforcing arbitrary rules that cause property damage. This is not about aesthetics. This is about you targeting me specifically." "That is absolutely not true. I enforce the rules equally and fairly." Then why are there 8 other houses with heat tape that you have not touched? Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. I cannot monitor every property every day. When violations come to my attention, I address them. Yours came to my attention because you drive past my house specifically looking for problems. I drive through the neighborhood ensuring compliance with our community standards. That is my job as HOA president. The conversation was going nowhere. I could see it in her eyes. She was not going to admit any wrongdoing, and she certainly was not going to help me. My ceiling is leaking, I said quietly. Water is damaging my bedroom. My insurance deductible is $2,000. That is money I should not have to spend because you decided to enforce a rule against me but not against anyone else. I suggest you contact a roofer immediately. Ice damage can worsen quickly. She started to close the door. I will be filing a complaint with the HOA board, I called out. The board meets the first Monday of each month. You can request time during the public comment period. The door clicked shut. I drove home feeling defeated and angry. The water stain on my ceiling had grown larger. I put a bucket down to catch the drips and called my insurance company. The claims representative I spoke with was sympathetic, but explained that ice dam damage often fell into a gray area. My policy would cover it minus my deductible. But if the insurance company determined the damage resulted from lack of maintenance, they might deny the claim. That afternoon, I drove to Home Depot and bought more heat tape and installation supplies. I figured Patricia could not cut it off my roof if I was there to stop her. I spent 3 hours in the cold, reinstalling the heat tape and making sure every connection was secure. My fingers were numb by the time I finished. Even through my insulated gloves, for a couple of days, nothing happened. The heat tape did its job, melting the ice along my roof edge and allowing water to drain properly. The leak in my bedroom stopped, though the water stain remained as an ugly reminder. Then on Tuesday evening, I came home to find a certified letter taped to my front door. It was from the Maple Ridge Homeowner-Association, signed by Patricia Whitmore in her capacity as president. The letter informed me that I was in willful violation of HOA bylaws and that I was being fined $500. Furthermore, if I did not remove the heat tape within 48 hours, I would be fined an additional $100 per day until compliance was achieved. I read the letter 3 times, my disbelief growing with each reading. $500. For trying to protect my house from ice damage, I called an attorney the next morning. The lawyer's name was Robert Chen, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Traverse City in a renovated building that used to be a warehouse. Robert was in his early 40s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, taking notes on a legal pad. "You have the heat tape installation visible from the street?" he asked. "Barely. You would have to be looking for it specifically. And other homes in the neighborhood have similar installations. At least 8 that I counted." Robert leaned back in his chair. "HOA cases can be tricky. Legally, you agreed to abide by the community guidelines when you purchased your property. The question is whether the HOA is enforcing those guidelines fairly and reasonably. They are obviously not. Patricia is targeting me specifically while ignoring the same violation on other properties. That is called selective enforcement, and it is grounds for a legal challenge. However, these cases can be expensive and time-consuming. You might spend more on legal fees than the fine itself. So she just gets away with it. Not necessarily. Let me write a letter to the HOA board outlining your concerns. Sometimes that is enough to make them reconsider. If not, We can discuss next steps." I paid Robert a $300 consultation fee and left feeling slightly better. At least I was doing something. The next week brought another stretch of bitterly cold weather. The temperature dropped to -20 on Thursday night, one of the coldest nights I had experienced since moving to Michigan. I kept my heat running constantly, and my heat tape worked overtime keeping my roof edges clear. Friday morning, I woke to a commotion outside. I pulled on my robe and looked out my bedroom window. 3 houses down, a crowd had gathered. I could see Patricia's white Lexus parked at an angle in the middle of the street. I quickly dressed and walked down to see what was happening. As I got closer, I realized people were standing in front of Patricia's house. More specifically, they were staring at her roof. The entire gutter system along the front of her house had ripped away from the roof and was lying in twisted wreckage across her front lawn and driveway. The metal gutters had torn completely free, bringing sections of soffit and fascia board with them. It looked like a minor explosion had occurred. The cause was immediately obvious. Massive ice dams had formed along her roof edges, creating thousands of pounds of ice buildup. When the gutters could not support the weight any longer, they had torn free violently. Patricia stood on her front lawn in a bathrobe and winter coat, her hair unbrushed, looking at the damage in shock. A man I assumed was her husband stood next to her, talking on his phone. Their front door hung open, and I could see water stains on the walls inside the entryway. Glenn, my next-door neighbor, stood nearby with his arms crossed. He was a retired auto worker in his 60s with a bushy white beard. "Quite a mess," I said quietly as I walked up next to him. "Ice dams," Glenn said. "Been building up all winter. I noticed it a few weeks ago but figured it was not my business." "She does not have heat tape." "Nope. Funny thing is, she is the one who has been going around telling people to take theirs down. I got a notice about mine back in December." Ignored it. I watched as a roofing company truck pulled up. The roofer got out, assessed the damage, and spent about 10 minutes talking with Patricia and her husband. The conversation looked heated. Patricia kept gesturing at her roof, and the roofer kept shaking his head. Over the next few days, the story spread through the neighborhood. Patricia's house had sustained significant damage. The falling gutters had crushed her landscaping and dented her Lexus. Water from the ice dam had leaked into her walls, damaging drywall, insulation, and causing potential mold issues. The estimate for repairs was over $15,000. The irony was not lost on anyone in Maple Ridge. The HOA president, who had been enforcing rules against heat tape, had destroyed her own house through the exact problem heat tape prevented. The following Monday was the monthly HOA board meeting. I had submitted my request to speak during the public comment period, and I showed up at the community center at 7 in the evening with a folder full of documentation. The meeting room was more crowded than usual. Word had gotten around about both Patricia's enforcement actions and her subsequent gutter disaster. At least 20 homeowners were present, many more than typical. The board consisted of 5 members. Patricia sat in the center as president. To her right was Donald Marsh, the vice president, a retired accountant in his 70s. To her left was Susan Carmichael, the secretary, a middle-aged woman who taught at the high school. The other 2 board members were Trevor Gaines, a real estate agent, and Margaret Foster, who worked from home doing something with insurance. Patricia called the meeting to order, and they worked through the usual business. Minutes from last month, treasurer's report, discussion of playground equipment maintenance. Finally, they reached the public comment period. I stood when my name was called and walked to the podium at the front of the room. Good evening. For those who do not know me, I am Quincy Olsen, and I live at 847 Maple Ridge Drive. I am here to formally protest the fine I received for installing heat tape on my roof." Patricia's expression remained neutral, but I saw her shoulders tense. I continued. "In November, I installed heat tape as a winterization measure to prevent ice dams. I was not aware that this required HOA approval, as I never received the notice that was allegedly sent. In early February, Mrs. Whitmore personally removed my heat tape without my permission or knowledge. This action directly resulted in an ice dam forming on my roof, which has caused over $3,000 in water damage to my bedroom ceiling and walls." There were murmurs from the audience. I pressed on. "I subsequently reinstalled the heat tape to prevent further damage. I was then fined $500 for this action. However, I have documented at least 8 other properties in this neighborhood with identical heat tape installations that have not been cited or fined." I held up my folder. "I have photographs, addresses, and dates." The enforcement of this rule has been selective and arbitrary. Furthermore, the rule itself is unreasonable when applied to temporary winterization measures that prevent property damage. Donald, the vice president, leaned forward. "May we see your documentation?" I handed him the folder. He opened it and began looking through the photos I had printed. Susan leaned over to look as well. Patricia spoke up. "The rules are clear. Exterior modifications require approval. Mr. Olsen installed his heat tape without seeking permission. Neither did anyone else," I countered. "And yet I am the only one who has been fined." Trevor, the real estate agent, spoke for the first time. "Patricia, have other violations been reported?" "Not formally, no." "So you personally identified Mr. Olsen's violation and enforced it, but you have not enforced the same rule on other properties." Patricia's cheeks flushed slightly. "I enforce violations as they come to my attention." "But you drove past at least 3 of these other houses to get to Mr. Olsen's property," Trevor said, looking at one of my photos. "The Hendricks house is 2 streets before his." An older woman in the audience stood up. "I would like to say something." Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. "State your name, please." "Helen Hendricks, 623 Birch Street. I have had heat tape on my gutters for 4 years. Never had any problem until I got a letter last week telling me to remove it, after Patricia's gutters fell off." Another hand went up, then another. Soon, 5 different homeowners were sharing similar stories. They had all received letters within the past week demanding they remove their heat tape. Glenn stood up. "This seems like retaliation." "Patricia's house got damaged because she did not have heat tape, so now she wants everyone else to take theirs down too." The room erupted in conversation. Patricia banged the gavel on the table. "Order. We need to maintain order." Donald was still looking through my documentation. He passed the folder to the other board members. They huddled together for a quiet discussion that lasted several minutes. Finally, Donald spoke. "I move that we table Mr. Olsen's fine pending a full review of our enforcement procedures and the reasonableness of requiring approval for temporary winterization measures." "Second," said Susan immediately. Patricia looked like she had bitten into a lemon. "We have established rules." "Rules that need to be applied fairly," Donald said firmly. "This documentation shows clear selective enforcement. That is a legal liability for the HOA." They took a vote. Donald, Susan, Trevor, and Margaret voted to table my fine. Patricia was the only dissenting vote. "Furthermore," Donald continued, "I move that we suspend enforcement of Section 12, Paragraph 4 as it applies to heat tape and similar temporary winterization measures pending a revision of the language to reflect reasonable maintenance practices." This motion also passed 4-1. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was not a complete victory, but it was something. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me for speaking out. Apparently, Patricia had been increasingly aggressive with enforcement over the past year, and people were frustrated but hesitant to push back. "She acts like she owns the whole neighborhood," Helen Hendricks told me. "My husband and I moved here 15 years ago. It never used to be like this." Glenn walked out with me to the parking lot. "You made an enemy tonight." I think I was already her enemy. Fair point. Watch yourself, though. Patricia does not take losing well. He was right. Over the next week, I received 2 more violation notices. One claimed that I had left my garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. The other stated that my lawn edging was not properly maintained. Both accusations were petty and borderline false. I documented everything with photos and timestamps, then forwarded it all to Robert Chen, my attorney. He sent another letter to the HOA board pointing out that this appeared to be harassment. Meanwhile, Patricia's house remained a construction zone. A large dumpster sat in her driveway, filled with damaged drywall, insulation, and twisted metal. Contractors' trucks were there almost daily. The damage had been even worse than initially estimated because water had been leaking into the walls for weeks before the gutters finally gave way. I felt bad for her, honestly. Even though she had caused my problems, I would not wish that kind of property damage on anyone. The stress of major home repairs is overwhelming. But then I came home on a Thursday evening 3 weeks after the board meeting to find my heat tape cut again. I stood in my driveway staring up at my roof in disbelief. The heat tape was cleanly severed in multiple places, the cut ends dangling. This time, Patricia had not removed it entirely, just cut it so it would not function. That was destruction of property. That was vandalism. This had crossed a line from HOA overreach into criminal activity. I called the police non-emergency line and filed a report. An officer came out about an hour later. His name was Officer James Rodriguez, and he was professional and thorough. He took photos of the damage, got my statement, and examined the cut marks. "Definitely intentional," he said. "You have any idea who might have done this?" I hesitated. Accusing Patricia without proof could backfire. "I have been having a dispute with the HOA president. She cut my heat tape once before, but that time she admitted it. She said she was enforcing HOA rules. That was legal, questionable, but this time the board voted to suspend enforcement of that rule, so she has no authorization to touch my property." Officer Rodriguez made notes. "Do you have any security cameras?" "No, but I am going to install some now." "Good idea. I will write up this report. If you can identify who did this, we can pursue charges for criminal mischief and possibly trespassing." The next morning, I took a personal day from work and drove to an electronics store. I bought a security camera system with 4 cameras and motion detection. I spent most of the day installing them, positioning cameras to cover my driveway, front door, and both sides of my house. Then I bought more heat tape and reinstalled it for the 3rd time. I was out another $250, but I was not going to leave my roof vulnerable. That night around 10, my phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. Motion detected on the north side of my house. I opened the app and watched live as a figure in dark clothing approached my house carrying what looked like garden shears. The camera quality was excellent. I could see clearly as the person set up a ladder against my house, climbed up, and reached for my heat tape. I grabbed my phone and called 911. "Someone is currently vandalizing my property. I have them on camera right now." The dispatcher took my information and said officers were on the way. I kept watching the camera feed. The person cut through one section of heat tape, then moved the ladder to cut another section. It took the police about 6 minutes to arrive. I met them at the front door and showed them the camera feed on my phone. By this time, the person had heard the sirens and was trying to flee through my side yard. Officer Rodriguez was one of the responding officers. He and his partner moved quickly around the side of my house. I heard shouting, and then everything went quiet. A few minutes later, Officer Rodriguez came back around front, escorting Patricia Whitmore. She was wearing black pants, a dark coat, and a black knit cap. She was not wearing the shears anymore, but I could see them lying on the ground where she had dropped them. She would not look at me. The other officer retrieved the ladder and shears. "Found them right under the cut heat tape," he said. "I was just enforcing community standards," Patricia said, her voice shaking. "He is in violation. Madam, the homeowner has informed us that the HOA board suspended enforcement of this rule." "Is that correct?" Officer Rodriguez asked. Patricia did not answer. "Furthermore, you are on private property without permission, vandalizing personal property. That is criminal mischief at minimum. I am the HOA president. I have authority. Not for this, you do not." They arrested Patricia right there in my front yard. They read her rights, handcuffed her, and put her in the back of the patrol car. Her face was pale in the flashing red and blue lights. I gave my statement, handed over the security camera footage, and watched as they drove away with Patricia in custody. The next morning, the story was all over the neighborhood. Several people called or texted me. "Glenn came over with coffee and muffins from the bakery downtown. Heard Patricia got arrested at your place last night. Word travels fast. You going to press charges?" The police said that is up to the prosecutor mostly, but they asked if I wanted to pursue it. I said yes. Glenn nodded slowly. "She brought this on herself, went too far. I just wanted to protect my house from ice damage. This whole thing is crazy." The following week brought a series of developments. First, the HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. Donald became interim president, and they appointed a committee to review all HOA policies for reasonableness and compliance with Michigan law. Second, Patricia was formally charged with criminal trespass and criminal mischief. Her court date was set for late April. Third, Patricia's insurance company denied a significant portion of her claim for the ice dam damage. They determined that the damage resulted from inadequate winterization measures and failure to maintain the property properly. Patricia and her husband were going to be paying for most of the repairs out of pocket. Fourth, I received a formal apology from the HOA board and a check reimbursing me for all the heat tape I had purchased, plus my insurance deductible, plus my attorney fees. They wanted to avoid a lawsuit, and honestly, I was happy to accept and move on. I used some of the settlement money to upgrade my security camera system. Glenn joked that I had better surveillance than the bank downtown now. Winter finally loosened its grip in late March. The snow melted, the ice dams disappeared, and I could finally assess the full extent of the damage to my bedroom ceiling. It was not as bad as I had feared. A weekend of work with joint compound and paint made it almost invisible. Patricia's house took much longer to repair. The contractors were still there in early April, replacing siding and fascia boards. The new gutters they installed were heavy-duty commercial grade with built-in heating elements. Ironic, considering she had fought so hard against my heat tape. I saw her at the grocery store one day in mid-April. She was in the produce section, examining avocados. She looked tired and older than I remembered. Our eyes met for a moment across the display of organic lettuce. She looked away quickly and moved to a different aisle. I felt a mixture of emotions. anger at what she had put me through, relief that it was over, and surprisingly, a little bit of pity. She had destroyed herself through stubbornness and an inability to admit she was wrong. The court date arrived on a Tuesday morning. I took another personal day and drove to the county courthouse in downtown Traverse City. The building was an older structure with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. Patricia's case was one of several on the docket that morning. I sat in the gallery with about 15 other people waiting for various cases. Patricia arrived with her attorney, a sharp-dressed woman in her 50s who carried a leather briefcase. When Patricia's case was called, we all stood. The judge was a man in his 60s with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He reviewed the charges and asked how Patricia pleaded. "No contest, Your Honor," her attorney said. The prosecutor presented the evidence, including the security camera footage. The judge watched it on a monitor, his expression neutral. Patricia's attorney then spoke about her client's previously clean record, her contributions to the community, and the stress she had been under. She mentioned the damage to Patricia's own home and the financial burden they were facing. She asked for a lenient sentence. The judge listened to everything, then asked Patricia if she had anything to say. Patricia stood. Her voice was quiet. "I apologized to Mr. Olsen for my actions. I let my position go to my head and I made poor decisions. I am sorry for the damage and stress I caused." The judge looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Whitmore, being president of a homeowner association does not give you authority to vandalize other people's property. You crossed a line from enforcement to criminal behavior. However, I do note your clean record and your plea. I am sentencing you to 1 year probation, 100 hours of community service, and you will pay restitution to Mr. Olsen in the amount of $800 for materials and time. You will also have no contact with Mr. Olsen except as necessary for HOA business, and you will resign from any HOA leadership position for a period of no less than 3 years." The gavel came down. Patricia nodded. She looked relieved that she was not facing jail time. I left the courthouse feeling like a chapter had finally closed. The $800 in restitution would more than cover the remaining expenses I had incurred. The no-contact order meant I would not have to deal with any more harassment. And her removal from HOA leadership meant the neighborhood could move forward with more reasonable policies. Over the next few months, things settled into a new normal. Donald proved to be a much more reasonable HOA president. The board revised several of the more onerous rules, including officially allowing heat tape and other winterization measures without approval. They also implemented a formal appeals process and established clearer guidelines for enforcement to prevent selective targeting. Patricia and her husband kept to themselves. Their house repairs were finally completed in June. The new gutters, fascia, and siding actually looked quite nice. I heard through Glenn that the total cost had exceeded $20,000, of which insurance had covered only about $8,000. I ran into Patricia's husband, Marcus, at the hardware store one Saturday in July. He was looking at lawn fertilizer and I was buying supplies for a garden bed I was building. "Quincy," he said, nodding at me. "Marcus." There was an awkward pause. "For what it is worth, I am sorry about everything that happened," he said. "Patricia gets focused on something and she does not know when to stop. It is not an excuse, just an explanation." "How is she doing?" "Better. The community service is actually good for her. She has been working at the food bank. Gives her something to focus on besides HOA rules." He smiled wryly. "That is good. The heating elements in our new gutters work great, by the way. The irony is not lost on us." I could not help but laugh. "I bet." We chatted for a few more minutes about neutral topics like lawn care and the upcoming 4th of July neighborhood cookout, then went our separate ways. That evening, I sat on my back deck with a cold beer, watching the sun set over the trees behind my house. The security cameras quietly monitored my property. The heat tape sat coiled in my garage ready for next winter, and my house was finally fully repaired. It had been an exhausting 6 months, but I had learned important lessons about standing up for myself and not backing down when I knew I was right. I had also learned about the dangers of giving someone too much power in a homeowner association and the importance of reasonable, fairly enforced rules. The Maple Ridge subdivision continued on as neighborhoods do. People mowed their lawns, kids played in the streets, and dogs barked at squirrels. The HOA still sent out occasional notices about things like pool hours and snow removal, but the tone was different now. More reasonable, more respectful. Glenn hosted a barbecue in August, and half the neighborhood showed up. Patricia and Marcus did not attend, which was probably for the best. Helen Hendricks brought her famous potato salad. Donald talked about potentially resigning as HOA president next year now that things were stable. "You should run," he told me, pointing at me with a hot dog. "You shook things up. We need more people willing to push back against nonsense." "Absolutely not," I said. "I've had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime." Everyone laughed. As fall approached and the weather started cooling, I installed my heat tape early this year in October before the first snow. I did it properly, carefully, and without asking anyone's permission because I did not need to anymore. The tape glowed orange in the darkness, doing its job of keeping ice at bay. My gutters remained secure, my roof stayed protected, and when the inevitable ice storms came in January, my house weathered them without incident. I heard that several other homeowners installed heat tape that winter too, now that it was explicitly allowed. Glenn upgraded his system. The Patels added tape to their garage roof. Even some of the people who had initially sided with Patricia during the controversy quietly installed their own winterization measures. One morning in late January, I was scraping ice off my truck windshield when I noticed Patricia getting into her Lexus 4 houses down. Our eyes met across the distance. She raised her hand in a small wave. I waved back. It was not forgiveness exactly, and we would never be friends. But it was acknowledgement. We were neighbors who had to coexist in the same community. The legal battles were over, the damage was repaired, and life moved on. That spring, the HOA board implemented a new policy requiring term limits for all board positions. No one could serve as president for more than 2 consecutive years. It was a direct result of the lessons learned from Patricia's tenure, ensuring that no one person could accumulate too much power and become entrenched in their position. I renewed my HOA dues in April without complaint. The association served a purpose when run properly. Maintaining common areas, organizing neighborhood events, handling shared expenses. The problem had never been the HOA itself, but rather one person's interpretation of her authority and her willingness to enforce rules selectively and vindictively. As I signed the check, I thought about everything that had happened. The cut heat tape, the ice dam damage, the fines, the confrontations, the arrest, the court case. All of it could have been avoided if Patricia had simply been reasonable from the start, if she had treated winterization as the standard maintenance. It was rather than a personal affront to her authority. But some people need to learn lessons the hard way. Patricia had learned hers through $15,000 in repairs, a criminal record, probation, community service, and public humiliation in front of her neighbors. It was a steep price, but sometimes that is what it takes. My own lessons came cheaper but were no less valuable. I learned to document everything, to stand up for myself even when it was uncomfortable, and to recognize when a situation required legal intervention rather than trying to resolve everything through conversation and compromise. I also learned that security cameras were worth every penny. The final piece of closure came in May when I received a check in the mail from Patricia for $800, the full restitution amount ordered by the judge. It arrived in a plain envelope with no note, no apology beyond what she had offered in court, just a check. I deposited it and used the money to take a long weekend vacation up to Mackinac Island. I stayed in a bed and breakfast, ate fudge, rode bikes around the island, and did not think about HOAs or heat tape or property violations once. When I returned home, Glenn was in his driveway washing his car. "How was the island?" he called out, peaceful. "No HOA nonsense, living the dream." I laughed and carried my bag inside. The house was quiet and cool, exactly as I had left it. The security system log showed nothing unusual. My heat tape was coiled in the garage, ready for next winter. Everything was as it should be. That summer was one of the best I had experienced since moving to Michigan. The weather was warm but not oppressive. The neighborhood pool stayed open late. Kids played in sprinklers and had lemonade stands. Donald organized a community yard sale that raised money for new playground equipment. Life in Maple Ridge settled into a comfortable rhythm. The drama and conflict of the previous winter faded into neighborhood lore, the kind of story people would reference with a shake of their head and a rueful laugh. Patricia completed her community service hours in August. I heard she had actually done good work at the food bank and had even volunteered for extra hours beyond what the court required. Maybe the experience had genuinely changed her perspective. Maybe she had learned that leadership was about service rather than authority. Or maybe she just wanted to avoid any further legal trouble. Either way, she stayed out of HOA business, kept her property maintained, and minded her own affairs. We existed in a state of polite mutual avoidance, which suited me fine. As September arrived and the leaves started turning, I realized that an entire year had passed since I first installed heat tape on my roof. A year of conflict, stress, legal battles, and eventual resolution. A year that had tested my patience and my willingness to fight for what I knew was right. I stood in my driveway on a crisp autumn evening, looking up at my house. The roof was solid, the gutters were secure, and everything was ready for another Michigan winter. The security cameras watched over everything silently. This year, when the snow came and the temperatures dropped, my heat tape would do its job without interference. The ice would not dam, the water would not back up, and my house would remain protected. And if anyone tried to cut my heat tape again, well, I had cameras recording 24/7 and the prosecutor's office on speed dial. But I did not think that would be necessary. The message had been sent and received loud and clear throughout Maple Ridge. HOA rules needed to be reasonable, enforcement needed to be fair, and no one person was above accountability. Glenn came over that evening with a bottle of whiskey to celebrate the anniversary of what he called the Great Heat Tape War. "To surviving your first Michigan winter," he said, pouring 2 glasses. "To reasonable HOA policies," I countered, "to standing up for yourself." "I will drink to that." We sat on my back deck as the sun set, talking about nothing important, lawn mowing strategies, the Tigers' playoff chances, whether the city would finally fix the pothole on Oak Street, normal neighborhood conversation. No HOA drama. No property violations, no court dates, just 2 neighbors having a drink at the end of a long day, exactly as it should be. The whiskey was smooth, The evening was cool and my house was safe. After everything I had been through, that felt like victory enough. As winter approached again, I installed my heat tape in late October without incident or interference. The orange cable snaked along my roof edges, ready to prevent the ice dams that could have cost me thousands more in damage. Other houses in the neighborhood did the same. It became a sign that winter was coming, as reliable as the leaves falling or the first frost on the grass. People looked out for each other now, too. Glenn called to let me know when he noticed an ice dam forming on the house 2 streets over. Helen organized a neighborhood watch to check on elderly residents during cold snaps. The community had come together in ways that the HOA's heavy-handed rule enforcement never achieved. Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal what really matters, to strip away the petty concerns about aesthetics, and reveal the core truth that we were all just people trying to protect our homes and take care of each other. Patricia's gutters, rebuilt with heating elements and commercial-grade materials, handled the winter beautifully. No ice dams, no damage. She had spent a fortune learning a lesson I could have taught her for free back in November when this whole mess started. But some people need to learn the hard way. As for me, I spent that second winter warm and dry, my house protected, my property secure, and my conscience clear. I had fought for what was right, stood up to someone who abused their authority and won, and that ultimately was what mattered. The heat tape hummed quietly through the cold nights, melting ice and protecting my investment. The security cameras watched over everything. The HOA operated reasonably and fairly under new leadership. Life in Maple Ridge went on, one winter day at a time, exactly as it should.